Good afternoon, everyone. This is Colton from Jennifer Schaus and Associates, and we are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We are kicking off 2022 with a new complimentary webinar series, and it is for our GIFT program, that is Government Industry Parties. And this webinar series is designed for companies who are trying to reach government contractors. Content can be anything related to advanced M&A planning, which is what we are covering today, and any other topics that are suitable for government contractors. This program is going to be a three-part series for companies to reach federal contractors by doing either 1, 2, or 3 webinars, typically running about 30 minutes each. We will promote it through our newsletter, which reaches over 23,000 subscribers. We'll be hosting on our GoToWebinar platform, and we will record the webinar and upload it to our YouTube channel, and a PowerPoint will go to slideshare.net. If you want information on pricing, please email hello@jenniferschaus.com. And just a couple statistics for our webinar. And once it is recorded, our YouTube channel is now at about 38,000 subscribers, and we are reaching up to 3.7 million impressions. And as you can see, our top 4 videos have thousands of downloads and some decent numbers there on the click-through rate. And again, if you want pricing and information on this program, send us an email and we're happy to provide a media kit. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Joe Cope from GovCon Wealth. And Joe, it is great to have you here with us today.
Colton, thanks so much. It's great to be back. I was here a couple of weeks ago. My business partner, Luis Corrales, was here last week. And today we'll be talking through some advanced M&A strategies, specifically designed for government contractors, though they can be applied for entrepreneurs in any particular field. Let's head to the next slide. The past 3 weeks, we'll do a kind of quick high-level overview of the work that we've done together. The first week, I discussed wealth and tax strategies specifically for GovCons, generally for people who own their businesses and are looking to optimize their taxes, to reduce their tax liabilities, to grow their wealth securely, and to really start the blocking and tackling that many people put off while they're building their business, kind of getting in there, and also talking a little bit more about a family office. Last week, Luis Corrales, my business partner, talked more about how to build a sellable GovCon, specifically the work, work through a case study that we had done together with some clients and their engagements and how we've increased the values of their firm. And today we'll talk a little bit more about, specifically about advanced planning with a little bit of help from our friends at G Squared Capital, a fantastic investment bank here in DC. Next slide, please. To do a little bit of a review of what we talked about in our first webinar, certainly I'd encourage you to go back and watch that and take a look at this in more detail. This is, again, a high-level summary. But our first kind of point is to really start to build your family office, or what we call a family office experience. This is a financial advising experience that is coordination, right? What we find is most business owners are busy, they're heads down in their business, not heads up, and they kind of accumulate financial advice and accounts and advisors in a junction approach. We really lack any type of coordination and coordinated advice. So what we're recommending is to look for fiduciary advisors, those who are exclusively working in your best interest, but also those who do multiple discipline work. This is going to be helping to coordinate tax, legal, wealth, estate, business strategies, someone who are more creative and forward-thinking style advisors. Entrepreneurs themselves are very helpful, ones who can really relate to what you go through on a day-to-day basis as a business owner. When you start to coordinate these things, especially around your estate planning, we're really looking long-term how to benefit your family and charities and not the government, right? That's how things are set up right now, that left kind of undone, untouched on the estate side, that when you pass, your spouse passes, that the government is going to have their hand in your wealth as much as your children or charities. Again, I'd also start to think if you're moving down this M&A path, is where will your wealth land? What we find a lot is that kind of the advisors that are our clients that we meet have worked with, they've simply just outgrown, right? They're good folks, but they may not have the sophistication that's needed to really be able to handle and to plan for the level of wealth that liquidity events can bring. And then lastly, your tax strategies. While you're building your business, whether your M&A path is 10 years down the road, there's a lot of tax that gets paid, and there are a lot of strategies that can be implemented walking right down the middle of IRS Boulevard, not even anything on the fringes that people simply don't know about. Many tax professionals either ignore or kind of say no, maybe acting a little bit more as compliance officers for the IRS, which we say gently. but we're looking for creative tax strategies, and that certainly can be done within a family office. What's the main benefit of this? Well, a reduction in your tax is a higher EBITDA, and that gets you a higher multiple, which we'll talk at the end of this presentation. Now, from a wealth standpoint, we do want to highlight that family offices, fiduciary advisors don't just work in the public markets. They work which are stocks, bonds, ETFs, funds, and some alternatives, but actually can look at private placements, things that have to do with private equity or venture capital opportunities or real estate investments that you hear about. And I think most commonly what we hear is, yeah, we bring these to our advisors and they just say, no, I can't do that, or I'm not allowed to, or they kind of shy away from it and tell you not to do it. And those are not things. Those are things that we believe in our firm we need to consider, we do consider, and we do implement with proper due diligence. And that's what you can do being an RIA in a family office. Next slide. In terms of building your actual sellable GovCon firm, what Luis, my partner, talked about last week was first and foremost, what kind of buyer are you looking for? Are you looking for an internal buyer or are you looking for an external buyer? If you are looking for an internal buyer, that would be key employees. We probably tend to walk toward a structure called an ESOP or an employee stock ownership program. Now, your employees generally can't afford to buy your company. And so there are certain trusts and certain loans that are done in this structure that can help make that happen. And certainly this process, I think I'll highlight two things about an ESOP. Number one is that you will not get as much money as you would with an external strategic buyer, but that may not be actually your primary objective. And usually it's not with an ESOP. It's to keep the business within a family or employee structure. And number two is you'll be included in the company for probably a 5 to 10 year earn-out period. So if you're interested in that you have to have a conversation now about this. It's just imperative that we start to think through, kind of if that's the path, you're gonna have to make sure there's a long enough runway that it meets your objectives. On the external buyer side, generally we're looking at strategic and financial buyers, those who are either competitors or simply private equity and other types of cash flow plays, and they look for different things for certain. We're going to look at things like full and open work, set aside work, do contracts novate. We'll get into that here in a little bit. Strength of management team. Luis talked a lot about compensation programs, creating golden handcuffs, making sure that your minority partners and key employees want to be there and have an impetus to help grow your company. And we compensate them for that and want to drive toward that exit, right? We want employees to act like owners. And there's ways to do that to really benefit those people who have built your business. And we want to help do that. We really believe in that. It's just a phenomenal way to spread the wealth, if you will, to kind of key stakeholders and key members of your teams. Financial records, certainly looking for clean and audited records. Again, that's kind of an area that we see that needs to be up-leveled constantly, as to making sure that you have things as they should be on the tax side. Operating agreements, company valuations, how is your company owned? We'll get into this in a little bit. I would highlight the company valuation. It is something that we want to look at, and we want to do it earlier in the transactions, specifically around estate planning, when you're gifting shares to trusts. If you have an LOI in your hand, I can't tell the IRS that your company is not worth what somebody's offering for it, right? But we can do that if you don't have an LOI. So I highly recommend, as we think through, an M&A, even if it's years down the road, that we start to understand what is the actual value of your company in the eyes of an external buyer and in the eyes of the IRS for estate planning purposes. Next slide. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more on the tax side. We're going to talk deal team, and then we're going to talk in much more depth about what are the actual factors that go into what buyers are looking for, and then how does that affect the overall multiple. And again, our friends at G Squared Capital, Greg Woodford, has helped provide some of this data. He's helped several of our clients sell their companies, and so that's going to be of great help in this conversation. On the tax and estate end, when you sell your company, taxes will be due, and they'll be due in the form of long-term capital gains rates, which currently sit, if you sell your company for north of $500,000 and your income matches that as well, will sit at 20%, meaning you've owned your company for longer than a year, plus a Medicare surtax of 3.8%. So your federal long-term capital gains rate will be 23.8% of a sale. So if you sell your company for $100 million, 23 million, excuse me, will be due to the federal government. It's not insignificant. Added on to that will be your state-specific capital gains tax, which usually is the highest marginal rate of that state. So in Virginia, for instance, that's 5.75%. So the total tax due is 23.8% plus an additional 5.75%. Now it's going to be even higher if you are based in DC, if you're based in Maryland as well. That capital gains rates is based on your personal domicile, not necessarily the basis of where your company is. And this is really important, okay? It's where you are domiciled. Most of our 90% of the firms that we're working with are still in the partnership or S Corp. Some are C, and there are some advantages. If you are a C corporation and you've owned your company for at least 5 years as a C corporation, you would be eligible likely for what's called a Section 1202. That Section 1202 will allow the first 10 million of gain to be passed to you tax-free. It's a really important note. If you are a C corporation, put a check, send us an email. It's worth a conversation to determine if you'll qualify for that and that 5-year period. Some specific rules. Now back to the state long-term capital gains rates. The highest income tax bracket, one strategy that some clients consider is a move prior to, and it should be 18 to 24 months prior to a sale, to a income tax-free state. It might be Florida, it might be Texas, Tennessee, Washington are kind of the usual culprits, New Hampshire as well. So if you have a desire to move and you have the family flexibility to do so, you certainly can do that. You can't move to those states for the purposes of avoiding tax, but you certainly can make an argument to the state of Virginia or Maryland or DC, wherever you're moving from, that you're moving there to fit your lifestyle for better reasons. And one of the benefits of doing so is avoiding that state-specific capital gains taxes. Now, the closer you are to a transaction and the closer that you move, becomes more of a dicey proposition and requires a lot more documentation that you're doing it for the right reasons. Now, many of us simply can't uproot our family, our children, and move to other states. It's just not viable. It probably may not be worth the money to even do that. But there are alternative strategies, and they are a bit more sophisticated. They have a little bit more complexity, but they can be done. And some of that is a usage of what's called a NING trust, a Nevada Nevada Income Non-Grantor Trusts. These are very specific trusts. These are high level. Few attorneys actually know how to draft them, but they can be used to move effectively the domicile of your company and the shares of the company that you own into a Nevada-based trust. And in doing so, if you're in a particular state that allows this, you potentially can stay in your state and avoid that state's capital gains tax. Okay, this is highly specific to where you live. This is highly specific to the rules that you're in, but these are strategies that we use every day. California is a prime example. New Jersey are prime examples of states that we do this work in with some of the best estate attorneys in the country. So again, very specific to you, but it's something to consider. On the estate planning side, now I talk estate planning kind of at a high level. Estate planning is the idea that the government is not the best place for your money to land. Quite simply, there's something called an estate tax. And what it means is that your net worth, when you pass on above a threshold, above a particular threshold, right now for a married couple, it's $23.8 million. Though at the end of last year, they threatened to reduce it, and we do expect that to go down dramatically. Above that threshold, the government will take 45% of your wealth. It's just par for the course. That's based on federal, and then each state may have their own rates. Some do, some don't, but they can be as high as 12%. So 57% of your wealth that you've been working really hard for could be shifted to the federal government coffers. And I think we're all likely in agreement that we believe we can do more and better with those dollars than the umpteen federal programs, that exist. And certainly there is choice and there is ways to do that to avoid what we call the success penalty. Right? Their government is penalizing success. So what can we do? Well, one of the strategies is to move those shares of your company out of your estate. And the way to do that is transferring those shares to what are called irrevocable trust or trust of certain names. Now, as I mentioned before, if you have an LOI in hand that says your company has an offer for $50 million, and we submit a gift validation letter to the IRS, which is required to move shares from one place to another, it is very difficult for us to argue that your company is not worth 50 million. We might be able to get maybe a 10% discount at some level for lack of marketability, but we have a market, right? It's a very difficult conversation. So when you're transferring shares that you already know the value of, then we have to play within the exact IRS limits, and we may not be able to move as much of those shares out of your state as possible. If we can do some of this work before you have an LOI, heck, before your company actually explodes in value, we're able to transfer the maximum amount of shares out of your estate. And in doing so, the current value of the shares and all the future value will be outside of your estate for estate tax purposes. So if we transfer shares when a company is worth $10 million outside of your estate, and eventually your company sells for $100 million, that entire value, and if we do it right, for the next 365 years of generations of your family, will be estate tax exempt. These are huge numbers that we can actually move outside. Now, what's really important is that by moving it outside of your estate, you do not lose access to that money. Okay, it does not mean you lose access. There will be shifts in types of control, there'll be shifts in types of access, but when using Nevada-based trusts, we're using kind of high levels estate attorneys, we are able to still benefit from that in your life. Okay, and that's really important. That's what we want to stress is there is a balance here, right? We're not going to say the estate tax is going to wag the entire dog, but certainly it's something that you've worked really hard for. We don't feel like your success, should be punished. What kind of trusts are these? You might hear these phrases in meetings. Maybe you've heard them before. SLATs, GRATs, CRUTs, ILETs, SLATs or spousal lifetime access trusts. Basically, it gives your spouse access to funds in the trust that you set up. In certain situations, you can have reciprocal trust, but you need to make sure they're not the same. Then you run into the rules of reciprocity, and it can nullify that work. Again, detailed work, ones we're happy to do. Grantor retained annuity trusts. This is basically taking an asset that might be worth $5 million now, putting it outside your estate, maintaining some type of control, and then all the growth on that asset will be out of the estate. The $5 million's in, but if it goes to 50, that 45 is out. This was a lot of the work we were doing last fall. The current administration had its, laser focused on some of these rules. They simply just weren't able to kind of find something that agreed with everybody to some degree. So they're safe for now, but we expect them to be in the crosshairs here in the next couple of years. CRUTs, anything to do with charitable remaining trust. Again, charity is a big way that we can give and a lot of tax benefits to do that. And there's a donor advised funds and charitable remainder trust. A lot of ways to create income for yourself or just be purely charitable. Again, highly specialized work that we're happy to do. Irrevocable life insurance trusts. Oftentimes our ultra high net worth clients, though we can do all this work and shift shares out of their estate, their success and quite frankly, the returns that you can make still will have an estate tax problem. And oftentimes insurance is required to help fund that estate, specifically for those who are heavily invested in real estate and fairly illiquid assets. Move to the next slide. Okay. As you move down this M&A path, who are going to be the players that you're going to work with, right? There's going to be a whole team. Now, certainly there's a lot of these things that you can go on your own with. And I think certain people are very comfortable with that. There can be, any number of reasons, time, proclivity, cost, all the reasons. And that makes sense. But there will be a team that you'll need to do transactions. And certainly there are costs to doing so. We found generally that the best advice create the best outcome. And the people that you'll run into, I think first and foremost, is having a family office, is having people who are advocates for you, who understand the totality of the picture, who understand all the details, but are staying with you at a high level and letting the other professionals kind of do their work. We're working on wealth and tax and estate, where things are landing, thinking through, what's next. What happens when you have a lot more free time? What does that look like? We actually do want to think about that. Boredom actually can be very expensive. So having things to do, projects, being on boards, spending time with kids, grandkids, that type of thing. We just want to think about it. M&A bankers. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about G Square Capital and their firm, but our experience has been that M&A bankers and brokers really achieve and deliver the highest values in known markets when you're working with folks who specialize in your industry. And that's what we want to create in any type of transaction, is what's called a controlled auction. You want multiple buyers from multiple different sources. Now, the past couple of years, the market has been really frothy. The cost of capital has been really cheap with the pandemic. The cost of money dropped to nearly zero or a couple percentage points. So certainly valuations rose. We saw a lot of transactions, and we do expect that to continue, even with a little bit of a lull and these kind of next expected interest rate raises, which over the next year might be 1% to 1.25%. Again, we're going to see a slight drop in valuations or maybe a little bit more stagnancy, but we still think it's a really good time to consider transacting. You'll work with attorneys on the M&A side, on the estate side, corporate CPAs. You want to have your books audited, fully audited, making sure that all I's are dotted, T's are crossed. Personal CPAs, typically, if you don't have the same firm, you'll be working with those. You may transition from the personal up to the corporate as your wealth just kind of goes higher. We help vet those individuals. Certain types of insurance brokers, there's R&W, rights and warrants, tail type of policies that are needed in transactions to ensure that the books are true, right? That the contracts, the innovation, and all the promises you've made about your company are in fact valid, and there's insurance that's actually wrapped around the whole deal. And then lastly, are minority partners or synthetic equity partners. Most companies we see have some type of compensation structure, or we've set one up for them that is going to compensate and create stay bonuses and create some benefit from these liquidity events. And certainly these are, while they're not going to be on the decision making about the M&A, they are going to be rewarded, and the buyer is going to want those folks likely to stay or to at least have the conversation. And so you'll be talking a lot with your current team, how to frame transitions and the like. Let's go to the next slide. With the few minutes we have left, I wanted to talk a little bit more and get into detail as to the valuation scorecard. This is Greg Woodford's of G Squared Capital Partners, and we set aside some actual characteristics, and I would suggest spending some time with Greg, myself, and talking through this exact kind of paradigm, or this spreadsheet here, as to what is driving value in a transaction. So on the right-hand side, you'll see what is creating highest value. On the left-hand side is what's detracting from value and is low. The first line item that you see is a contract award basis. This is kind of basic 101 GovCon, right? On the high side, the most valuable companies have 100% full and open work. Now we know that is really not, there's not too many companies that have totally full and open work. What we do see, and I want to highlight this is super important, we've seen sole source contracts and SBIRs be some of the highest multiple EBITDA type companies. When they get the timing right, the value can be substantial. So it is the companies that kind of time it right when they have just renewed, they have their 5-year, and they're ready to go. When they find their timing and they find the right innovation strategy, that leads to the highest multiple. Okay, again, 50% or less based on set aside work. That's just basic SBA. If you're kind of going up the ladder, going SDVOSB or women owned or 8A, that actually drags the value down a little bit back, simply because it narrows the buying pool, right? Who can acquire you is really a question. right? On the neutral side, 35% or less, that's common what we see in transactions today. If you're kind of moving toward full and open, your set aside starting to dwindle. That's around the neutral basis. Prime versus sub, you see that greater than 70% prime will get you the highest valuation. Direct versus sub labor, I think it's just helpful to know 50% or less, that will kind of drag down the valuation. Greater than 80 gives a little bit more control and predictability. It keeps talent in the door upon an acquisition. That's helpful. Organizational conflicts, won't go into that too much. Growth is important. This is easy for you to measure in your company, less than 5 or going to 20%. Again, we want to sell when assets are on the rise. That's the time to sell. You know this based on the stock market, right? Sell as it's going up, keep it as it's going down, and buyers want to see that growth curve. On the margin basis, and I think this is critical, margins that are healthy for multiples, we're really looking at least 8 to 12. Right? If you're in the 5 range right now, you have some room to grow. You have some pricing to work out to really increase those margins, and your life will be better for it. But certainly as we go 8 to 12 or 12 or higher, this is where your multiples are really impacted. Same thing is true of taxes. If we can create some tax strategies and reductions, we can do some things that can help increase those margins. Revenue visibility, pipeline development. Anyway, you can come back to this slide and take a look. But let's go to the last and final slide. Now, where do valuations land? And so the way that we think about this is companies with salability concerns or those without salability concerns, and then really highly differentiated companies. We think about this on kind of a spectrum. Companies with salability concerns is that 3x number, that 3 to 5. That's 3 to 5 times your EBITDA. So what would make a company have salability concerns? Well, we've seen the previous slide, but this one will say the award type, right? So again, that set aside work. If you're completely set aside, that creates a salability concern, and you'd likely be within that 3 to 5 times EBITDA. So you're a $1 million EBITDA company, high salability concerns. Again, we know it's your baby. It's no insult of anything like that. It's just how buyers view companies, right? It's that simple. We try to be as agnostic in this as possible. And we also know it's incredibly personal. We run companies and we take a lot of pride. It puts so much effort into this. But we do have to take a little bit higher view, allow the professionals to step outside, to coach and to kind of come in and say, hey, this is roughly where we think things are. And we just want to be honest, right? There's not a whole lot of room or time in this world for not being honest. And so we want to do it. We just want to do it politely. So on the set aside side, if you're full set aside, you're probably looking at the low end on the 3x side of multiples. Again, positions, these are similar to what you've seen in the last slide, prime versus sub. Are you commoditized, providing kind of basic IT support, or are you differentiated, right? Do you have technology? Do you have anything that's SBIR related? Anything that's kind of unique to you? Is your portfolio truly differentiated? And we've seen this, right? We actually have a client that from and I think customer mix basis was very narrow in their customer mix, but they're highly differentiated in their offerings and their proprietary technology. So these things, while they might be competing on this scale, are likely to go into the companies without salability concerns, right? There are certain ways and different flavors in how we weight these items in terms of where you'd land. Now, what's really important is that when these are all weighed, that a company is looked at objectively, an analysis is completed, and that a rough and a healthy and accurate estimate is made as to what we think we can actually get for the company, right? Identifying the buyers and coming in with something reasonable, right? If we shoot for the moon, which we certainly can, it may just turn off buyers. And it's really important that we don't go to market and then we take the company off. When that happens, it's kind of like, think about real estate, right? When you've seen a house that's been on the market for 45 days, it's overpriced and there's something wrong with it, right? That's our kind of natural phrase. So we're looking to kind of find that, fine-tune that value. Now, how I will loop all this together is whatever number we're looking for or what we come up with, we do have to apply that to your personal financial objectives, right? So if you say, I want this, then we need to actually take a look at your company and say, is it worth that? Is it worth more? And if it's not worth what we need, how can we get it there? And that's the type of work that we love to do. And certainly we have lots of partners who like to do that as well, is how do we maximize the value of your company so that you can transact, whether that's 6 months, 2 years, or 5 years down the road. With that said, we certainly will welcome questions, not on this webinar, but if you'd like to shoot me an email, you have my email there, Luis's email, our phone numbers are there. You can watch 2 weeks ago on the wealth and tax strategies. Last week's a little bit more info on growing your firm, and we hope that you found today's webinar based on advanced M&A interesting and helpful.
Thank you, Joe, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us. And thank you to all who attended. The YouTube link and slides will be available within the next 24 hours. And again, if you are interested in hosting your own GIT webinar or are interested in a media kit, please email hello@jennifershouse.com. Thank you.